So let's get to fixing the third-person camera rotation. What we're going to do in this video is organize our blueprint a little bit differently in the tank with an azimuth gimbal, as we call it, and some slight changes in rotations and the spring arm, so that firstly the tank camera works properly, and secondly the horizon always stays horizontal, or at least optionally always stays horizontal, even if the tank is tilted like this because of, say, a hill. So let's take a closer look at what's going on with this rotation. We want to use something called gimbals. You probably want to search for that with text, not with voice, just in case it goes wrong. But gimbals will be somewhere on trusty Wikipedia. Here you go. The idea of a gimbal is it's a support that allows rotation of an object about a single axis. So we're going to be using a couple of gimbals. So let's take a look at the tank blueprint and see what we need to do to make the camera rotation behave itself. Well, we have this spring arm, and we can visualize that here in the viewport as basically an arm that sits here, and it's actually got a red length to it, and we've actually currently got our camera in the wrong place. It's not at the end of the spring arm. So let's fix that. Choose your camera and reset the location, pushing it onto the end of the spring arm. So now you may say, well, how do we position our camera? Well, what you need to do is change the length of the spring arm. So the spring arm has a target arm length here, and we set that to, say, I don't know, 1,000, 10 meters, something like that. And then we're in better shape. So now the camera will stay on the end of the spring arm. I'm going to remove the camera's rotation for now. And of course, if we were to play now, the camera would just be on the floor behind the tank. But we still have this strange rotational issue. So what we want to do is we want a couple of gimbals. One, which allows rotation of the camera in this plane. Probably easiest for just show you. Get the rotation tool up this way in azimuth. Okay, so let's do that first. How do we do that? Well, we can't do it all in one object without twisting the camera. Imagine this was plugged into a ball joint. If it's plugged into a ball joint, we can end up with the wrong type of rotation. You see how as I rotate the camera both in azimuth and elevation, you see how it's ending up on the tilt like that? We don't want it on the tilt, right? So what we want to do is put yourself a scene root component. It's basically a simple transform into the scene. Put that on the tank. If you accidentally put it at the root like I did, then just put the tank back at the root. But the scene root wants to be on the tank. Then put the spring arm into the scene root. Now I'm going to rename these things because it's not very helpful just calling it scene. What this thing is it's an azimuth gimbal. Okay, so this thing will allow this rotation, azimuth gimbal, great. Then the spring arm itself is a spring arm, but it also provides for elevation. So I think I'm going to just leave it called a spring arm, but we are only going to control it in elevation. So I'm going to move it up a little bit. The azimuth gimbal position, I'm going to actually put that rather than at the middle of the tank. This is where the camera's pointing at. We want it pointing about 1.5 meters off the ground. So in summary, we have a scene root component that says this is where the camera's pointing at if it points straight down the spring arm, which it currently is. And the location of that is 1.5 meters off the ground in the middle of the tank. You then have a spring arm, about 10 meters long, rotated up like this, and on the end of that you have a camera, probably with no rotation. Okay, let's take a look at how it works. It's pretty good. We've still got the weirdness. So, what do we do about the weirdness? The weirdness is because I said that the azimuth gimbal is only driving the azimuth, and the spring arm is going to be doing the elevation only like this. So elevation happens here like that. Azimuth happens here in the azimuth gimbal. Okay, so what do? We go to the input setup. We already have a reference to the spring arm, and let's have a look. Azimuth, we said, is being done by the azimuth gimbal. So what we need to do is get rid of the spring arm there, pop in a reference to the azimuth gimbal by dragging from the component, and it's that becomes the target of an azimuth rotation. So the azimuth gimbal handles the azimuth rotation, and the aim elevation is handled by the spring arm itself. Let's try this. This is about 90% of the solution we're looking for. Left and right and up and down, and it works exactly as we want. But let's see what happens if we put the camera, or the tank, on a piece of sloping ground. So I think at this stage I'm going to sculpt the terrain a little. We need some test grounds here. So I'm just going to pop into the landscape molding tool and the sculpt tool. I'm just going to bring up some landscape here. that we can start to use. Remember, that fragmentation of the components of the landscape is expected before it rebuilds the lighting. And I've got a little bit of land here now, so let's just try going to the tank, the player start rather. And then you need to come out of landscape sculpting mode, at which point you'll be able to move the player start, and I'm just going to move this player start above the hill. And let the tank fall onto the slope. Let's try it. You see, as the tank rotated on the slope, you see that our whole camera has rotated. That's okay, that's a choice as to whether we want the horizon to rotate. If we don't want the horizon to rotate, then the way that we deal with that is in the spring arm itself, you can say don't inherit the role of the thing you're connected to. So the spring arm's camera settings, you can disable inherit role. And then what will happen when we fall and twist is that the horizon stays horizontal and then the tank itself appears to twist in our view. So this is the camera being like gyro stabilized in roll. I hope that all makes sense to you. So that's how I'm going to leave things. I may as well spawn on this hillside. Why not? For a bit of fun. I'm just going to recap exactly what's happened here for you so that it's clear how to do these more complicated third-person cameras. So, because we need control of the azimuth and the elevation, we've decided to put an object at the target of the camera. We're calling it an azimuth gimbal. So that is like a, it's a bit like the turret, actually. It's the same type of rotation that we get with the turret itself. It's just a horizontal rotation. So that would be like a kind of peg sticking up, if you like. Onto that peg is attached a spring arm, which we can, because of a hinge or another gimbal, we can choose different heights. And we're only controlling the elevation with that. So if you look at the input setup, you can see that azimuth, elevation. And then what we're doing is we're pointing the camera straight down the spring arm. We don't have to, but we're doing that. And because when the tank rotates, the whole system rotates, i.e. the tank and the spring arm and the camera rotate when the tank's on the side, of course the view of the horizon becomes tilted because the camera and the tank are tilted relative to the horizon. So the final thing we did is we went to the spring arm and said, well, don't let the camera on the end of the spring arm inherit the role of the spring arm and hence the tank and hence the spring arm. All right, so we finally end up in the situation where we have the camera how we want it. Pretty cool. So that's it for this video, and I haven't got a challenge for you in this one because it's really just a question of following me through. But what I would say, if you haven't been doing what I've been doing as you go, just get this set up to your satisfaction. You don't have to use the exact settings I'm using, right? You could have the camera a little bit further away. You could decide that actually you want to inherit the role and that you quite like this camera going with the tank. It's up to you. All right, it's not going to affect the gameplay at all. So just set the camera up how you want it now, and I'll see you in the next video.